primary ingredients in this recipe, which are flour, water, salt, and our yeast leavening agent. It's really a basic recipe, but when you get the method of making it right, the timing, the shaping, and the baking, you get a piece of bread that's worth more than the sum of its pieces. You get a baguette. In this video, we're going to be making a simple crusty baguette, as our yeast will be using fruit yeast water. And just in case you want to know more about fruit yeast water or how to make it, there's a link in the description box to our video on it. Do check it out. Back to baguettes. This is a recipe I've actually got through a lot of trial and error. It does take some practice to really master working with and observing the development of this dough, because it's relatively high in hydration, it's pretty wet. However, I'd kind of liken it to riding a bicycle in that once you have it down, you probably won't forget it. And once you've tasted a delicious homemade baguette, it'll be unforgettable too. So let's step straight into it. Let's take a baby step to start this baguette journey. That's our Poolish, so just grab 100 grams of bread flour and an equal amount of fruit yeast water. Mix the two to combine, then we'll leave it for around 12 to 18 hours to fully rise and ferment. After that time, the Poolish should look bubbly, and it will also smell absolutely delightful. We could also try a float test on the Poolish. If it floats in a bowl of water, then it's good to go. You should also observe the beautiful gluten strands underneath the surface. When our Poolish is ready, we'll make the final dough. Throw the Poolish into the bowl, or really let it slink out, and then scrape whatever sticks to the bowl. It's also best to do this above a scale, so we can make sure we get every bit of Poolish, or most of it. I mean, if there's 1 gram left, it's fine. With that, first thing we'll do is add water. This recipe is about 73% hydration, so 73% times the total amount of flour in this recipe is how much water we have in it. And that's going to help us get big open holes in the crumb, or as we call it, an open crumb. After that, we'll throw in salt. Salt isn't really what shines in bread, but it is what makes bread really shine. Without salt, you get a flavorless lump with a lot of issues. Salt in the right amount not only enhances flavor, it also tightens the gluten structure. To be exact, it should be somewhere around 2% of the total amount of flour. So make sure you've got that amount right. After salt is in, we'll stir this until the ingredients are relatively well incorporated. Then we can add in the final ingredient, flour. Using our spatula, we'll combine it into a shaggy mass. Then we're going to put away the spatula and mix with our hands. We're just going to mix until it looks cohesive and homogeneous. So about 3 to 5 minutes of mixing. After mixing, not only will it be smoother and homogeneous, it will also have developed some gluten, so it'll be a bit less sticky and more elastic. Since it's there already, we're just going to scrape off the dough on our hands and put it back into the bowl. Then we can just cover it with plastic, and we're going to leave it for 45 minutes before doing our first set of stretch and folds. After 45 minutes, the gluten in the bread will have relaxed from the mixing we did, and the dough should look like this. I also have prepared a small bowl of water by the side to prevent the dough from sticking onto my hands. I'm going to dip my hands into it frequently throughout these sets of folds. Now, to do a set of stretch and folds, we're going to start by grabbing the dough from the top side, pulling it up, and then folding itself over. We'll turn the bowl 180 degrees. Repeat on the opposite side. Then do the same thing for the other two sides. After all the folds, all we have to do is cover the bowl back up and wait another 45 minutes before doing our next one. It's very simple, isn't it? Once you get quick at this, it's possible to do it in under 1 minute. That's how fast this process is. My personal record is something like 35 seconds. Not that I'm proud of it or anything. To briefly outline the whole process of stretch and folds, we're going to do a total of 3 sets of folds with 45 minutes in between each set. These folds are meant to develop gluten structure in the bread while preserving its airy interior. So we rinse and repeat these sets of folds until we come to our final third set of folds, at which point we should have done enough folding to build the gluten structure, and we can test that by doing a window pane test. So taking a small portion of the dough and trying to stretch it out thin enough to see light passing through it. As you can see it happening here, the dough has passed the window pane test. The dough should have also become a lot airier like this. It's fluffy and jiggly when you move the bowl. Alright, after the folds are all done, we'll leave it to ferment for an hour outside at room temperature. Then we can either put it in the fridge overnight or leave it outside until it rises this much. To get the best taste, the first option is preferable, because letting the dough rest in the fridge slows down the yeast, allowing the enzymes in the bread to work their magic, creating complex and, more importantly, yummy tastes. Therefore, if you can, I'd really recommend letting the dough cold ferment in the fridge. Now, after the whole bulk fermentation has ended, first thing we'll do is prepare our work surface with a little bit of flour. Make sure to dust it evenly, just a little bit. Then we'll drop the dough out onto it by flipping the bowl over like this. Then after spreading it out a bit, we'll make a line down the middle of the dough with some flour and cut it into 2 even pieces, being swift and accurate with our scraper. The flour down the middle should help prevent the dough from sticking to the scraper. How many pieces you divide it into depends on how you plan to bake it. You can divide it into smaller portions so that you can place it into a casserole pot or a Dutch oven. Here, 2 is enough for me, so I'm going to leave it at that. And now we'll take one of the pieces and start pre-shaping it. So we'll take the edges and pull them in before rolling the dough up to form a roll like this. And then we can tighten the dough up by pushing the dough back in this way. This forms a really nice smooth roll, which will make an excellent basis from which we can do our final shaping on later. We can also make the dough a bit more rectangular by tucking in the edges. We don't need to tighten the dough too much though for pre-shaping, so this much is enough since it already looks very smooth. We'll stop here and put the roll aside. Then we'll do the same pre-shaping we did on the other piece of dough now, going through the same steps. Once we've done that, we'll put the pieces of dough next to each other and cover them with a glass bowl to prevent them from drying up while we let them rest. We're only going to let them rest for 30 minutes, so it'll be quite quick. This is called a bench rest. It's just meant to let the gluten relax in the dough so that we can shape it later without running the risk of ripping our dough. After 30 minutes have passed, the dough should look a lot more relaxed and have spread out. We're going to take off the glass bowl now and get shaping them. shape them, we'll start by preparing the surface with a small amount of flour, and then using a scraper, we'll scoop one of the pieces up and flip it over onto the surface. We'll also slide the dough around to make sure that one side has been properly coated in flour. We'll now try to form the dough into a rectangular shape. We want to do this by patting it out and stretching the edges. We could also degas it at this stage, which is going to influence the resulting crumb structure of the bread. If we just pat it out gently, not really degassing, then we'll get an open crumb, so lots of big air pockets. If we were to just hammer down the dough, degassing it fully, the resulting crumb wouldn't be as open, it'd be a bit more dense with much smaller air pockets. It's up to your own preference for the crumb. All the while, we should still be shaping it, again aiming to make it as rectangular as possible. Once we're satisfied with the shape, we're then going to fold the bottom end of the dough up over, using our fingertips to seal it. And then we'll pull the top end over that seal. We'll lift it up a bit and stretch. We do this to quickly make sure the bottom is well floured and not sticking to the surface. We can also add a little flour if it's a bit sticky. Then to tighten up the baguette even more, we make a final crease like this. So placing our thumb in the middle of the dough, we fold it over and then seal its edge with either the heel of our other hands or our fingertips. It's a quick and easy process, really. Make sure you're really pressing it down when you seal though, because it has to be sealed properly. During shaping, if the dough gets sticky, it's perfectly fine to use a little more flour, but we're trying to use as little as possible, so just the bare minimum amount to keep the dough from sticking. If you'd like to form pointy ends and or make it longer, you can also roll it out and then apply more pressure on the ends to sharpen them. Okay, for me, this baguette looks great, so it's time for us to leave it for the final proof. Now we'll just quickly transfer the baguette onto the couche. I've got a rolling pin to prop it up on one side, and we're going to also make a fold on this side to support the baguette. After the first baguette is in, we're going to move on to shaping the other piece of dough, going through all the same steps. And finally, we'll transfer the baguette next to our first one so that they can shore each other up. And also adding another fold in the cloth to prop up the other side of the baguette. Cover it, and with that we're good, and we'll leave them for 45 minutes to an hour and a half as the final proof. Depending on your room temperature, it may take shorter or longer. Sometime before the baguettes finish proofing, we're going to start preheating the oven to 250 degrees Celsius. Make sure it gets nice and hot inside there. Alright, so here the baguettes are after their final proof. We'll just pull the couche open now, and we're going to use a board to flip the dough onto. I also like to add a little rice flour to prevent the dough from sticking to the board and making a mess. To move the baguette, flip the dough firmly but gently onto the board by holding onto the cloth. Okay, so to score the baguettes is the next step. In this case, we're going to aim for 3 scores that are almost horizontal. It takes some practice to really get this right. I just recommend being decisive and cutting quickly to get a clean cut. Once the baguettes have been scored, we'll slide them into the oven one by one, spraying after each one has entered the oven. With that, we're going to let the bread bake on top and bottom heat at 250 degrees Celsius now for the first 20 to 25 minutes, or until we see it's no longer growing. Then, we'll take away the steamers and lower the temperature to 230 degrees Celsius. Bake for about 20 more minutes or until it's done. Now, while baking, what we'd like to do for the first period of time is to create a condition inside the oven close to a sauna. A lot hotter though and extremely humid. This type of condition is extremely beneficial to our bread because the humidity in there will allow our bread to rise more by preventing the crust from drying up and basically halting all growth, which is bad. If you've got an oven that has a built-in steam feature like a combi oven, then feel free to use it. If you don't have one, then this is a nice solution setup that I've found works pretty well. And it's done. There we have our delicious baguettes. They are crispy, chewy, and beautiful.